You're innately valuable, innately worthy. And what narcissists do is they prey upon people who don't feel that sense. And so the more you gain respect for yourself, the more you realize that you don't need to respond to every little thing that they do. You don't need to defend yourself. You don't need to argue. I say you have to put an invisible shield down around you and start putting up boundaries and say, I demand respect for myself. I don't care if you're my mom, my boss, my sister, my brother, my neighbor, or my best friend. I deserve to be treated with respect, and I'm not going to engage in conversations where I'm not being respected. You define your value, and people will think what you tell them to think. You can tell when people walk into a room and they know who they are and you can't mess with them. But they define that.
That's Rebecca Zung. She's a well-known high-conflict negotiation expert, a U.S. News-recognized best lawyer in America, and a USA Today best-selling author. She's also the founder of the proprietary SLAY method, a proven blueprint for negotiating with narcissists. And her programs, including the High Conflict Negotiation Certification Training Program, has transformed thousands of lives in more than 150 countries and on every continent. So learn 1, how to identify if someone is a high-conflict personality. 2, how to slay, yes, that's an acronym, your bullies and win. And 3, the mindset trick to keep narcissists at bay. And if you want a quick summary write-up of these takeaways, please sign up for the Gold Nugget free email newsletter at awesomeatyourjob.com. I'm Pete Bacchitis. This is How to Be Awesome at Your Job. And now, here's Rebecca. Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm super excited to hear your perspectives. And I'd love it if you could start us with an eye-popping, jaw-dropping tale of narcissism run amok in a workplace. Lay it on us.
Ooh, run amok in a workplace. Gosh, I thought you were going to just be like one of my stories, but in a workplace, I've seen it in so many different situations. But one of the ones that I thought was the most egregious was a client that I coached. She had been a CFA for, I think, a Fortune 20 company here. And she was wooed to Hong Kong. Initially, she thought she was going to actually be a CEO of China, Asia, of this particular company. It was a family-owned company, but like $1 billion company. And she was going to be the CEO of one of the divisions. And so this guy completely love-bombed her, brought her to Hong Kong several times, told her that this is how it was going to be, that she was even going to be able to have women's initiatives and all sorts of other things. And she wasn't really looking to leave her other position, but because this particular person who was based in Hong Kong really laid it on for her and put everything that she wanted into the contract, that she ultimately left her position, moved to Hong Kong, and started with this company. Now, this guy was the son of the owner, who was a billionaire who lived in Switzerland or something. But so she gets there, and the first day, she doesn't really have an office. There's all kinds of files and extra things in the office that's supposed to be hers. And the guy that she was talking to the whole time, he's not even available to meet with her on the first day. So they stick her in this office and they don't really have anything going on for her. They don't even really put her on the website. That day turned into the next day. And then she started asking questions, and then they were documenting her file that she was difficult. And the guy started to say, well, we're not ready to have you go into that position just yet. You're going to start off over here. Meanwhile, they're paying her according to the terms of the contract, but they're not giving her the position. And really, she was just trying to get the position that she came there for. And so ultimately, she hired me, and we figured out a way that we could potentially expose him and some things that were going on in that company. And she didn't ultimately want to go back there, but she just didn't want harm done to her career. And so she was able to make a settlement from it. But that was like one of the craziest stories that I'd ever seen, ever.
Yeah. Wow. That's almost like a nightmare movie situation. You could turn that into a horror movie, it feels like, in terms of, you know, how we're all a little bit nervous about a new job. It's like, this is the worst. You're out of your element, your family, your friends, your country, and it's not what you thought and hoped it would be. That is spooky. And so then in her situation, the result was to hire one of the best lawyers in America, according to U.S. News and World Reports, and really get into the meat of the matter. And it sounds like you went right for the juiciest, scariest, most sensitive thing they might be worried about a lawyer going after. And I guess we'll just have to wonder what that might be for confidentiality's sake, I'm guessing, unless you'll indulge us. Will you?
Well, I mean, I can't say too much more because I don't want it to be so obvious of who it was or whatever. But let's just say the best way to get to a narcissist is always going to be looking at what I call their diamond level supply, which is their image, how they look to the world, their reputation. And then you take their own behavior. And so you're not lying about anything. You're not contriving anything. I call it ethically manipulating the manipulator. And you say, well, you know, here's what's going to happen if we don't come to a resolution. I don't want to have to do this. Don't make me have to do this because I just want to walk away in peace and I want my life. But if we can't come to a resolution, then this is how it's going to have to be.
All right. There you have it. Understood. So right from the get-go, we've seen the worst case scenario and then the nuclear option for responding to the worst case scenario. Understood. Maybe we could back it up a little bit and share, as you've worked with the stuff, you've researched, you've written the book, you've worked with clients, any particularly surprising or counterintuitive discoveries you've made when it comes to this adult bully stuff?
Yeah, they're always way more afraid of you than you are of them. You know what I think of it is it's always very similar to me when I think about the bully in A Christmas Story. Did you ever watch that movie? It's like on every year. So in A Christmas Story, they run it every year, like all, day long or whatever. It's one of these cable channels. But in that story, this little kid is being bullied every day by this other kid who's like bigger, taller, he says he has yellow eyes, and he's on his way home and he's like, oh God, here comes that guy again. And then one day he's so mad about other things going on and it was just not the day to mess with them. And so he fights back against the bully and ends up like going crazy on him. And after that, the bully ran away from him and never bothered him ever again. Because it was really all about fear mongering and terrorist tactics, right? But it all comes from a place of scarcity, a place of fear. It's not authentic power. True authentic power, it doesn't have to use all of that. I love the analogy of the Wizard of Oz because in that movie, Glinda the Good Witch, when the Wicked Witch came around, went, go away, you have no power here. And the Wicked Witch went, oh God, I'm not messing with her. I'm going to mess with people who are actually afraid of me. Because Glinda was like completely nonplussed. Like it was like a gnat flying around. Like, please, lady, don't even waste my time. And that's what it's like when you have true authentic power. You don't have to use control tactics. You don't have to use fear mongering. You don't have to use all of these things, right? Because you know who you are. And that's what makes all the difference in the world.
All right. I love that. You know who you are. Potent, if I may. If we don't yet know who we are, how do we get there?
Isn't that the $64,000 question, right? I mean, you start by realizing that they're preying upon your own triggers, your own traumas, your own fears, and not who you were born to be. You're born to be authentically powerful in your mission, in your purpose. And you know when you're there because you feel aligned with everything that you're doing, everything that you're saying. And what narcissists do is they prey upon your vulnerabilities. They prey upon people who they don't feel secure. So, dealing with your own traumas, your own triggers, understanding all that stuff got layered on. You were born as a perfectly wonderful baby who had no fears and, other than maybe falling or loud noises. But as a beautiful brand new baby, you feel completely like life is good. Everybody loves me. I love everyone. And then what happens? Your parents do something, or grandparents, or kids. You go to school, you get bullied at school. Somebody says something, looks at you wrong. Then your neighbor kids, whatever, and your siblings. Who knows? But all this stuff gets layered on, and you forget that you actually are truly and authentically powerful as you are. You're innately valuable, innately worthy. And what narcissists do is they prey upon people who don't feel that sense. And so the more you gain respect for yourself, the more you realize that you don't need to respond to every little thing that they do. You don't need to defend yourself. You don't need to argue. I always say I'm half Chinese, so I always wear jade, but never jade, never justify, argue, defend, or explain. Because the more you do that, you're giving them your power. You're saying, here you go, have my power. And the true act of power is to take that back and say, I see you. I see you like I see a toddler having a tantrum on the floor. But when I see a toddler having a tantrum on the floor, I don't feel like I need to get down on the floor and have a tantrum with them or actually get into it with the toddler. You just go, you look at them and okay, you done yet? All right. Well, when you're done. And that's the way you have to do. I say you have to put an invisible shield down around you and start putting up boundaries and say, I demand respect for myself. I don't care if you're my mom, my boss, my sister, my brother, my neighbor, or my best friend. I deserve to be treated with respect, and I'm not going to engage in conversations where I'm not being respected.
Understood. And I'm curious, when we think about, if we want to call them bullies or narcissists or high conflict personalities, what proportion of the population falls into this category versus might someone just happen to have a different perspective than us and be having a bad day? And how do we tell the difference?
Great question. So when I did my research for my book last year, I found that approximately 15% of the population has a personality disorder that lacks empathy. So it's about 6 or 7% narcissism. And then you go into, there's bipolar personality disorder. There's other personality disorders that lack empathy. And so when you put them all together, it's about 15%. Now, then there's also a percentage of the population that has what they call high conflict personality disorder, which may not necessarily be narcissism or bipolar or any of these others, or borderline or whatever, but it could potentially be extremely difficult to deal with. Now, what I have to say is that this is a spectrum, right? So all the way to the end of the spectrum are your people that have these personality disorders that lack empathy. If you think of Jesus or the Dalai Lama or whoever your person is on the other end of the spectrum, then everybody else sort of falls in between. And so, where are you on that spectrum? It's hard to say, but we all have an aspect of narcissism in us. I mean, we all want to feel seen, heard, and know that we matter. That's the human experience. That's just who we are. But when you are to the end of the spectrum where you're like, I am in so much pain, so much shame, so much hurt, so much whatever is going on inside of me that I feel empty inside. And therefore, all I can do is try to get as much supply as I can to the detriment of anybody else. I don't have the capacity to have feeling for anyone else. That's when it's an issue.
Okay. So, well, these numbers are higher than I expected. It's a good chunk of folks. And just lacking empathy. And so just operationally definitions, let's hear. I think I know what empathy means. When you say it in this context, what do you mean?
having the ability to step in somebody's shoes and say, I get you, I feel you, I understand your pain. I can see why you would be hurt by that. Your dog just died. Oh my God, that's just awful. I feel that pain for you. I feel that. A person who doesn't have any sense of that is like, okay, but you're still going to come to work, right? I mean, I'm not going to lose money over this, right? They're just thinking about themselves in that situation.
Okay. Well, so you've got an acronym to slay the bully, SLAY. Can you walk us through it?
So S stands for strategy, L stands for leverage, A stands for anticipate, Y stands for you. The strategy piece is having a vision, a goal, a very specific vision that's not defined by the narcissist or the bully. It's defined by what you want. And so what does that look like? Does it mean if you're breaking up with a business partner that you want to keep the business, that you want to be bought out, that you want to buy them out, that you want to sell the business? What does that look like specifically? And then L is leverage, which I alluded to earlier, but basically if you have these two different forms of narcissistic supply, which is anything that feeds the narcissist's ego, and the higher level form of supply for them, the ultimate form is that diamond level supply, which is going to be their image, their reputation, how they look to the world, all the window dressing. It could be a prestigious job, prestigious friends, big house, money, the big bank account, the car, whatever it is. Then it could be a new girlfriend, a new business partner, a boss, colleagues, employees, people that they don't want to look bad in front of. They will protect and defend this form of supply above any other form. The secondary form of supply is what I call coal-level supply. And that is bullying people, making them feel small, pushing them down so that you feel bigger, smearing people, passive-aggressive remarks or behavior, moving the goalposts in negotiations constantly for no reason whatsoever. All of that is what I call coal-level supply. In order to get a narcissist to not be constantly in your space anymore, you have to figure out a form of supply that's more important for them to protect, i.e. the diamond level supply, than the supply that they get from manipulating you. And that's the coal level supply. And then threaten that source of supply. Otherwise, they will never leave you alone. And I want to back up for a second and just give a quick little overview about how a narcissist is formed. How they're formed is formed in childhood. I alluded to this toddler in an adult body, but it's because when they were children, they were in fight or flight on a continuous basis, different times over and over. When this happens to any of us as humans, our brain emits hormones, adrenaline and cortisol mostly. And that cortisol, when it's being built up in a brain of a child, can actually cause arrested development in the limbic system part of the brain. And that's what causes the issues. So while their prefrontal cortex can continue to develop the thinking and all of that, what happens is if they get triggered as adults by a perceived slight, loss of control, exposure, it could be a tone, it could be an eye roll, it could be a body language, whatever it is, then that limbic system is activated. It shuts down the prefrontal cortex. And now you're dealing with full on emotion and they don't think clearly. They're not thinking in terms of rationality. They can't think long term. What's the impact of what I'm doing? And so they will literally take themselves down to take down the other person because they see that other person as public enemy number one. Everything is black and white with them. You're either for me or against me. If you're against me, then you're public enemy number one. That's why it's impossible to negotiate with or communicate with a personality disordered person as you can a rational and or reasonable person. Does that make sense?
Understood. Yes. So we're not really talking about the sensible, rational issues and the options and the best path forward. But if we're more so, it's like, I'm going to take away your toy. Deal with that.
100%. Even if I'm going to get in trouble, I don't care. Because I've seen guys that'll say, I will burn my business to the ground before I have to pay her alimony. And you think, why the hell would you do that? That makes no sense. Because then you don't have the income either. But that's what they do. Because they're in that full on, I'm not thinking from my reasoning brain.
Well, Rebecca, that's an interesting example there. And so they say that, and in that moment they feel that, but in practice, do they actually do that?
Yeah, you do start to see them doing things like that. They'll fire their top person because that person wasn't on their side and sided with the wife, and they'll just stop working. So, we always say in the divorce world that they end up with SIDS. The income spouse, whoever that is, ends up with SIDS. We call it sudden income deficiency syndrome. Like, oh, suddenly they're not making any money and they have no money as soon as the divorce starts. But part of it is because they just decided, you know what, I'm not going to take contracts. I'm not going to fulfill on them, things like that.
Yeah. And it's really hard to kind of wrap your arms around because it's not rational. In some ways, it's slightly rational in the sense of if we're being stone cold, no empathy, it's like, well, now I am earning half as much money from engaging in this work that I get to pocket for myself as I was before. Therefore, I'm less interested in doing many of these jobs. So I guess in some ways, there's a cold rationality to it. But at other times, that's a self-destructive situation you described in terms of it's like, I'll burn my company to the ground before I pay you a cent because I'm filled with rage. That stuff, that's sort of eye-opening for me. I guess I've lived a sheltered kind existence that folks they don't just feel that way in the moment, but they, in fact, execute the rational steps over weeks, months, years to execute.
Yeah, they do it. I've seen it. And the other half of that is that people will pay attorney's fees that they don't need to be paying. I've heard guys say to me, I'd rather pay you than her. And so they are constantly blowing up potential settlements because they enjoy the game of it. It's the sadistic piece of it. And so normal, rational people will sit down at a negotiating table and they'll say, all right, how can we make sure that both sides feel seen, heard, know that they matter, get something that they want from this exchange so that we can come to a deal? Like, who wants to pay lawyers or who wants to keep fighting or who wants to, there's a cost to all of that, right? Not just lawyers' fees, but also part of your life and the stress of it. And whether you're dealing with a business litigation situation or a partnership litigation, or maybe you're just trying to negotiate with a boss for a raise or a colleague or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a litigation setting, but they're not trying to come to a resolution. They enjoy the game.
Well, that really is eye-opening in terms of a total reframe. It's like, oh, the normal game I'm playing with normal people almost all the time is not what to do here.
No.
Instead, I'm going to take this other approach, which you've been walking us through us. So we get strategic and leverage and please continue.
Yeah. So A is anticipate what the narcissist is going to do and be 2 steps ahead of them, which means, they're going to try to bait you. They're going to try to trigger you. They're going to try to do whatever they can to continue to get their supply source, their hit. I mean, they're like drug addicts almost. And so you want to come up with ways that you're going to stay ahead of them, shut that down. And so what I do is I have a whole wealth of tools in the toolbox, but some of them, for example, are what I call fluff for favor, vomit later, which is fluff up their ego a little bit to get a little something that you want, give it in exchange for something that they want. It's like you're fluffing up a pillow, basically. So sometimes that might be the plan. Sometimes the plan might be making a plan stand, I call it, which is whenever you have to meet with them, make sure you have an agenda, a scope, and a time limit so that they can't sandbag you, so that you keep it to facts, not feelings. Because one of the things that a narcissist will constantly try to do is bait you into all sorts of things, whether it's going for the jugular. If you think that you're really great at money or handling or careful with money, they'll say that you're a spendthrift, that you were horrible, that the only reason why they have money, the company's making money is because of them, stuff like that. And you want to sit there and defend yourself. What are you, crazy? You weren't even here. I was the one that brought in that particular client, and I was the one. Now they have you. Now they have you. That's exactly what they want, right? So you want to go, no, today we're talking about this issue. We're trying to figure out how we're going to dissolve this partnership, and we're going to look forward. We're not going to look back, because now you don't want to get into that. And then having a time limit, because you want to be able to say, oh, you know what? It's an hour or 2 hours, whatever it is that we allotted for this. And while talking to you is my absolute favorite thing on the planet, we're going to have to continue this conversation another day, because you want to take control of the narrative instead of having them take control. And then the why is you, which is your mindset. We kind of started with this at the beginning, which is great, because I kind of like to start with it. But it's you and your authentic power, and you being on the offensive instead of the defensive, you thinking about how can you walk forward instead of backwards, or even just staying straight. You're shifting a power dynamic. You're really going 180 degrees a lot of times. And so I say, step 1, don't run. Step 2, make a U-turn. Step 3, break free. Why is you breaking free? Why is you saying, you know what? I see you all the time. I don't even care, because you're not a thing in my life anymore. Oak trees don't worry about whether the wind is going to blow, because they know they're rooted, and that's what you want to be.
Okay. So much good stuff. Well, Mal, could you maybe walk us through a couple examples of all this played out in action?
I'll give you an example for the why. There's many people ask me, like, what's a main message when you're dealing with a narcissist or anybody? And I would say that you and you alone define your value, and people will think what you tell them to think. And that includes a narcissist. And I'll tell a quick little story, which is when I first went out on my own many years ago. I had been practicing law for a few years before. And then I went and I was a stockbroker at Morgan Stanley for a couple of years. I had my Series 7 and 66. And then I decided to go back to law to start my practice. And at the time I hired a business coach, and I said to her, these people are going to think I'm such a flake. Like, I literally went from being a lawyer to financial to back to being a lawyer. And I was in Naples, Florida at the time, which is a very affluent community, very kind of judgy. And so I said, I was very worried about looking flaky. And she said, people will think what you tell them to think. She said, you can tell them that you're a flake, or you can tell them that you are the only family law attorney that has a financial background. So therefore, you are more qualified than any other attorney in town. Which story would you like to tell? And I said, oh, maybe I'll tell that one. Sounds pretty good.
Well, that sounds like that'll be better for client acquisition and billable hours.
That sounds better. I'll take that one. So that's what I did. I positioned myself that way. I marketed myself that way. And within 2 years, I had the top family law practice there, and I was representing billionaires and all sorts of very powerful, influential people. And I can tell you that none of them would have hired me if they thought I was a flake. But it was really how I showed up. And if I had showed up as, oh, I'm sorry, I know I jump around a lot and, like kind of defending myself, then people would have seen me as that. But I showed up as, no, this is who I am. And this is what I do. And this is my background. And, this is actually going to help you. And I can't tell you how many people hired me because of that. Oh, I'm hiring you because you're the only one that has a financial background. But it's such a lesson because you define your value and people will think what you tell them to think. You can tell when people walk into a room and they know who they are and you can't mess with them. But they define that.
Beautiful. Okay, let's hear another story.
One of my favorite stories is what I call it the $2 million apology. So I was doing mediation and I was representing this guy who was like the top developer in Florida.
Real estate developer?
Yeah. And even at the time that we did our initial meeting, our initial consultation, he was like acting like, oh, I was so lucky that he was choosing me to be his lawyer. And at the time I was like referring out like 80% of the people who were coming to me. And so I had way too much to do. And so I'm like, eye rolling the whole time, like, whatever, bud. But then, he goes to hire me. And so at the time he goes, oh, is there any room in your retainer or your hourly rate? And I looked at him and I was like, no, but I'm happy to refer you to cheaper people if you'd like. And he was like, no, that's okay. I'm going to go with you. I said, okay. So then fast forward to mediation. It's like 12 hours. It's like 9:00 at night. We've been there forever. We're all like ready to get out of there. And we're about ready to sign the agreement. And the wife was going to get about $2 million in alimony over the next few years. Of course, she was getting a lot of other assets as well, but part of it was alimony. And so the mediator comes into me and says, hey, Rebecca, can I talk to you for a second? I'm like, you better be coming to me with an agreement that's people signing. Like, what are we doing over here? So he pulls me out in the reception area and he says, I have a very unusual request from the wife. She is willing to waive alimony if he will apologize to her for everything that he did to her during the marriage and take responsibility for it.
Verbally, not written?
Verbally.
Okay.
Yeah. So she wanted him to go into the room without anybody else there and apologize. And I'm like, what's the catch? And he's like, no catch. This is what she wants to do against her lawyer's advice, whatever. I'm like, all right. So I go back into the room and I tell my client what he has to do. Go over there, like puppy dog with your tail between your legs, whatever, say your thing. And then she's going to waive alimony. And he says, no, I'm not going to do it. And I'm like, yes, you are. Because I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to have to give this guy, like in the lawyers call a CYA letter, like cover your, what, because what the heck is he doing over here? So I'm like, I'm going to kick your ass. Like, get over there. So he finally goes over and he apologizes and she signed off. She waived alimony. And it was like that important to her to get him to apologize. But it was he almost didn't do it. And so at the end of the day, we're standing in the parking lot. He's got a signed agreement, things done. And he says, hey, by the way, he's like, thank you very much. And he said, by the way, I just want you to know that I'm glad that you didn't negotiate your retainer or your hourly rate at the beginning. He said, because if you had, I would have thought that you were going to be soft negotiating on my behalf throughout the divorce. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, really? But, it's such an the whole thing was very interesting to me and almost like a great case study in negotiating in so many different ways, because I stood firm on my value. And then the fact that he didn't want to negotiate at the end because of his own ego, his own pride, because what would happen is then he no longer would have a tie to her because he wasn't going to be paying her these monthly payments. So he couldn't continue to control her. And that's part of the reason why she also was willing to waive alimony, because she wanted a clean break from him. And he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to let go of his supply source. But he finally did.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers and things to unpack there. And what's powerful with that value is that it was in negotiation. They talk about, the BATNA all the time, the best alternative to negotiate agreement. And in your situation, it really was the case that you were pretty well booked up. You were referring out lots of work. And therefore, it sounds like weren't even tempted in the least to reduce your retainer. It's like, you could walk away and I will not be upset. As opposed to if you were just getting started, you're like, oh man, I need every client I can get. Well, maybe you would probably have some more temptation there.
Oh, well, I have a story about that too, if you would like.
Please do.
So when I did first go out on my own, the guy who ultimately ended up being my law partner when I moved to California, he had been practicing for years. He was basically like my dad's age, and he was member of the Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers. He'd won all these awards, whatever. He's such a wonderful man. I went out on my own. He wasn't my partner or anything. He was just my friend. He was really opposing counsel in some ways. Like 5:00 one day, I had been out on my own for maybe a month. My receptionist says, hey, Jack Long is here to see you. I'm like, Jack Long's here to see me. Okay, so I go out and we sit down in the conference room, and he says, he was from New York originally, so great. And he goes, I need to talk to you about your hourly rate. And I said, what? And he goes, it's too low. And so, I was charging like $285 an hour or something like stupid, because like I said, well, I'm so afraid I'm not going to get clients, and he goes, I'm going to tell you a story. He said, when I first went out on my own in 1969 or whatever it was, like, forever ago, he goes, I did a divorce for a guy and I charged him $4,000. And he comes to me and he goes, Jack, you did a great job for me. You charged me $4,000. And he's like, yeah. And he goes, my wife's attorney charged her $5,000. And Jack's like, okay, so you should be happy. And the guy goes, well, obviously he's better than you.
Obviously.
And so Jack stood up at that point and he goes, raise your damn rates. And he walks out. The next day he calls me and he says, I got a great referral for you. He said, I'm conflicted off. It turned out to be Arnold Schwarzenegger's goddaughter. So I ended up getting to travel with Arnold and become close to him and their family. But he says, I'm giving you this referral. He said, and he started explaining the case to me and he gave me all the details. And then at the end, he goes, and they have money, so charge something decent for Christ's sake. And he hung up the phone. And so I took that client, and that day I raised my rate by like $100 an hour or something, and I never looked back. It went up from there, obviously. It was such a good lesson for me.
Well, there's so much there with regard to pricing and psychology. And my favorite part was the word obviously, because in fact, the relationship between price and quality is fuzzy. And sometimes the best lawyers don't cost the most. It's just that high prices have to fund fancy buildings and other overheads, as opposed to strict quality of any professional. But nonetheless, the perception remains like, oh, well, the best are obviously the most expensive, and the cheap ones must not be the best.
Yes, exactly. And that's why he told me to raise my rates.
Okay. Well, tell me, any final thoughts before we hear about some of your favorite things?
I always like to tell people to start looking at people from an observer's perspective, because the way people treat other people is a direct reflection of the way they feel about themselves. So you can never take anything personally. I mean, people who feel great about themselves don't go around treating other people like crap. That's just the bottom line. So if you take things personally, then it really is about how you're feeling inside. So don't let your trauma do the talking. Don't let your trauma do the picking. Do the personal development work, and all the rest will come.
Big thanks to Rebecca for sharing her wisdom with us. And big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. One sponsor to check out is LinkedIn Jobs. Did you know that you can post a job for free at linkedin.com/beawesome? And with a fresh year, perhaps you're like many small business owners looking for some fresh insight and talent to make 2024 extra amazing. Well, LinkedIn Jobs has created tremendous tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and free. I love how they make it so easy with their promotion and selection tools. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. No. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Here's some fun facts. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours, and small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/beawesome. That's linkedin.com/BEAWESOME, as in you are being awesome, be awesome, to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. One sponsor to check out is Jenny Kane. The holiday season is officially upon us, and Jenny Kane is a top destination for the very best of all things festive and gifting. They've got a handy gift guide that makes it oh so easy to check off everyone on your list. Jenny Kane has luxurious cashmere pieces, such as my all-time favorite hoodie that I am wearing right now as I record this, and tasteful homeware pieces, such as their legendary candles. Their coats are also super adorable and cozy and a great answer to the cold temperatures approaching. Finally, check out Jenny's Edits, which provides favorites under $250 and lists out handy gift-giving categories. For a limited time, How to Be Awesome at Your Job listeners get 15% off your first order when you use the code AWESOME15 at checkout. Now that's on top of their 10% rewards back rewards program. So to get 15% off your first order, visit JENNIKAYNE, JennyKane.com, and use the promo code AWESOME15 at checkout. Now could you share a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
I love the one from Rumi, which is set the world on fire, seek those who fan your flames. I love that one because I want you to think about, like, are people like dousing your fire? Are they pouring water on it, or are they fanning your flames? They're throwing logs on it and saying, hey, I love seeing you fly. I want to see you fly some more. There's room for everybody. So that's one of my favorite quotes.
Oh, thank you. And a favorite book?
I love Seat of the Soul, Gary Zukav's The Power of Intention, Wayne Dyer, Return to Love, Marianne Williamson. There's one I'm reading right now, actually, called This Thing Called You by Ernest Holmes, I think is the author. It's an older book, but I didn't even know that it existed. So good, really, really powerful.
All right. And is there a key nugget you share with clients or in your books that folks tend to remember and repeat back to you frequently?
Oh, I mean, I think it's the things that we've been talking about. One of the things that I do say that I hear is what's negotiable is contracts, issues, and terms. What's not negotiable is your self-respect, your self-esteem, or who you are.
And if folks want to learn more or get in touch, where would you point them?
My YouTube is RebeccaZung.tv. I do have a Crush My Negotiation prep playbook that people can get for free, which is at winmynegotiation.com. And then my website, RebeccaZung.com, has literally everything, tons of resources, a lot of everything about all my courses, my coaching programs, my certification, all of that.
All right. And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
I would say do everything with complete integrity and do what you say you're going to do, when you say you're going to do it, how you say you're going to do it, even with the smallest things, making promises to yourself, and the rest will come. The first negotiation that we have to do most of the time is with ourselves, for our own self-worth, keeping the negative committee quiet and in our head. And so by keeping promises to yourself, it helps you raise your own self-esteem and become the best version of who you are.
All right, Rebecca, thank you. This is beautiful, fascinating, fun. I wish you many successful negotiations.
Thank you. Thank you, Pete. It's been great.
I love Rebecca's perspective on the diamond supply, what they really, really care about most, and how you can do battle on that domain. I'm thinking about my favorite TV series, Breaking Bad. I won't give you any spoilers. I recommend see it if you haven't already. A key character says to another, I'm going to hit you where you really live. And then we see pictures of barrels of cash. And suddenly, boom, that other character springs into action because sure enough, that's his diamond supply. That's what he really cares about. So it's helpful to remember if you happen to unfortunately find yourself on the other end of a narcissist. Great stuff from Rebecca. If you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items that we've referenced, please pay us a visit at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP1009. Hope to catch you next time, and peace.